Welcome back to my channel. Thank you for tuning in. Today we're diving into a dramatic turn in global power dynamics. Putin humiliated again. Turkey dealt a devastating blow to the Russian economy. This story is not just geopolitical theater, it's about real economic consequences, strategic calculations, and shifts in alliances. Stay with me, because what's unfolding could reshape regional influence for years to come. From the very start, let me say, when a headline says, Putin humiliated, that's not mere clickbait. Over the past years, Russia has endured repeated setbacks, in Ukraine, in Syria, in its own strategic ambitions. But what's happening now between Turkey and Russia carries a different gravity, because it touches Russia's economic core, not just its military reputation. So what exactly has happened? Turkey, which occupies a unique position bridging East and West, has leveraged its strategic location, energy infrastructure, and diplomatic flexibility to strike at Russia's vulnerabilities. At the same time, global pressure, especially from the US and its allies, has forced Turkey to reconfigure its trade relations, particularly with Russia. The result? A blow to Moscow's trade, revenue, and regional dominance. One of the clearest signs of this shift is in Turkish exports to Russia. In early 2024, Turkish exports to Russia plummeted by roughly one-third compared to the same period in 2023. This isn't simply a seasonal fluctuation, it's a structural break, triggered in part by external pressure, namely US efforts to clamp down on the flow of dual-use goods and technologies that feed Russia's war machine. By applying secondary sanctions on banks that facilitate such trade, the US effectively made many risky or sensitive transactions untenable. Turkey, walking a tightrope between its ties with Russia and its growing rapprochement with the West, had to make adjustments. Those adjustments aren't costless. For Russia, losing Turkish markets matters. Turkey is not a trivial trading partner, it's a gateway to Middle Eastern, African, and European markets. Russia's ability to export and import goods across that corridor has been steadily constrained. At the same time, Russia must now contend with reduced access to Turkish supply chains, logistics hubs, and transit routes. The gas relationship is another flashpoint. Turkey depends heavily on Russian gas imports, over 50% of its pipeline gas comes from Russia. But in December 2024, Ankara secured a waiver to continue making gas payments to Gazprombank despite US sanctions. That waiver was critical, because without it, Turkey might have been forced to cut gas supply, a politically dangerous move at home. But for Russia, granting or even negotiating that waiver means ceding leverage. Turkey is showing it can play by multiple sets of rules, extracting concessions even from Moscow. Moreover, the existence of the Turk Stream pipeline further complicates the picture. Russia built Turk Stream as a way to route gas directly to Turkey and beyond, bypassing transit states like Ukraine and the traditional overland routes. The pipeline was intended to cement Russian energy dominance in the Southeast European corridor. But with Turkey repositioning itself diplomatically and economically, that energy lifeline becomes a potential liability. As Turkey diversifies its energy sources, builds up LNG capacity, or even re-exports Russian gas under its own label, Moscow's grip weakens. Turkey also plays a role in the Black Sea grain diplomacy. The Black Sea Grain Initiative, the agreement allowing safe export corridors for Ukrainian grain, was brokered by Turkey, the UN, and Russia. That deal placed Turkey in a mediation role, giving it both political clout and leverage over grain flows. But when Russia eventually pulled out of the deal, citing unmet conditions, Turkey found itself in a position to manage negotiations, influence global perceptions, and pressure Russia diplomatically. It is yet another way Turkey has inserted itself between Russia and its ambitions. What this all adds up to is a strategic weakening of Russia's economic orthodoxy. A country so long accustomed to being a regional energy hegemon, a military bully, and a diplomatic hardliner, being pushed hard, from multiple sides. Putin has suffered humiliation in many spheres. But now we see Russia being squeezed at its economic arteries. It's worth noting that Turkey's successes in doing so don't come from brute force or a dominant military campaign. They come from deft diplomacy, flexible alignments, and smart use of economic tools. Turkey still buys Russian oil and gas, still engages in trade, still maintains corridors. But it is doing so on its own terms more often than before. In Russia, this dynamic stings. Loss of export markets, constrained access to transit routes, diplomatic isolation, and pressure on energy architecture all chip away at the Kremlin's strategic stability. One could argue that the economic battlefield is quickly overtaking the physical battlefields in terms of long-term impact. As we watch this unfold, there are several things to keep an eye on. Will Turkey accelerate moves away from Russian energy dependence, more LNG terminals, more renewable push, perhaps more interconnection with European gas networks? Could Turkey act as a re-export or transit hub for goods that Russia can no longer send directly, but relabeled through Turkish intermediaries? How will Russia respond? More coercion, trade retaliation, or attempts to court other regional allies more aggressively to compensate for Turkish losses? Finally, how will the West, especially the US and EU, view Turkey's pivot? Will they reward it, pressure it, or try to steer it further away from Russia? To wrap up, this is not just another episode in the Cold War of modern geopolitics. It is a deeper fracture in Russia's economic backbone. Turkey, by turning its strategic location and leverage into a tool against Moscow, has delivered a devastating blow. And Putin, once again, finds himself humiliated, not by tanks or battalions, but by the clever reordering of trade and diplomacy. Thank you for staying with me through this deep dive. If you like this analysis, give the video a thumbs up, share it with others, and hit subscribe so you don't miss future breakdowns. I'm looking forward to your thoughts. How far do you think Turkey can push before Russia snaps back? Leave it in the comments, and I'll see you next time.